Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here to bring you some DraftKings quarterback selection tips for the upcoming NFL season. We're going to go in three levels. We're going to start with a tip for beginners. We're going to go with a tip for season-long guys coming over to daily fantasy, and we're going to end up with a tip for the seasoned pros who've been playing a lot on DraftKings, something that you guys should be thinking about if you didn't last year. Our beginner tip is something that's pretty simple and straightforward. Touchdown passes and passing yardage bonuses are two of the things that are going to help your quarterback be the top scoring quarterback on the day and really give you a chance to take down a big tournament. You want to look for guys who can throw for 300 yards and also rack up multiple touchdowns. If you don't get multiple touchdowns or a lot of yards, you're not going to have enough points out of your quarterback to really keep you in contention in any of your tournament plays. Even in your cash game plays, you still want to make sure you get a lot of points out of the quarterback position because it is one of the highest scoring positions on the week and something that's usually pretty safe and solid for you to get big points. A lot of times if you pick right on your quarterback and the other guy doesn't, it's almost an automatic win in your head-to-heads. So picking a quarterback that can get you that bonus and also throw a couple touchdown passes is definitely something that you're going to want to look for on a weekly basis. If you can choose right on a weekly basis, you're going to wind up being a profitable player over the course of the long run. As for those season-long guys who are coming over to daily, there's something that I want to make sure you guys understand. When you're playing in season-long, you really only have one, maybe two quarterbacks on your team that you're going to be using on a weekly basis. Therefore, you really only got to research those two guys and the defensive matchups that they have. When you're playing in daily, though, you really got to look at every quarterback on the roster and every quarterback that's available in the pool and try to see who has the best matchup. You can use any quarterback that you want, so it's not like you're handcuffed to just using the one or two guys that you have on your roster. Therefore, you can search out the guys that are in the best spots and have the best chance for upside. When I say the best spots and the best chance for upside, what kind of things do we really want to look for? Here's a laundry list of stuff that you want to look for when you're trying to pick your starting quarterback. First, you want to search the matchup for the quarterback. Things that you want to know about the matchup is the defensive line of the team he plays a defensive line that could put a lot of pressure on a quarterback? The more pressure a defensive line can create, the more mistakes a quarterback's going to make. The more incomplete passes, the more interceptions he might throw, the more times he's going to get sacked and maybe fumble the ball. None of those things are going to be positive for his overall daily fantasy score. You also want to know about the matchups that his wide receivers have. Sometimes there's a team that'll have one shutdown corner, but the guy on the other side is getting burned by everybody. If that's the case, you want to know, are the cornerbacks going up against his wide receivers? Is it a good matchup for the wide receiver? Does the wide receiver have an advantage in speed? Does he have an advantage in height? Does he have an advantage in just overall skill and route running ability? Wherever you see big advantages for the wide receivers, you know that the team is going to try to attack it. Football teams try to attack the other team's biggest weakness. So if the other team's biggest weakness is that their cornerbacks can't stop anybody, you can tell that the wide receivers are going to be involved in a game plan and the quarterback's going to be racking up a lot of yards. Another thing you want to look at is the Vegas lines. We try to target games that have low spreads and high over-unders. The reason for that is if it's a high over-under, you're going to have a chance for a lot of scoring. And when there are games with a lot of scoring, that usually means a lot of passing through the air. The reason you want a game that has a high total but a low spread is you want to make sure that the game stays close. If the game gets out of hand, a lot of times in the second half, think about a lot of the football games that you've watched over your lifetime. If it's the third quarter and one team is up by 2 or 3 touchdowns, they're not throwing the ball much anymore. They're handing it off to the running back. They're chewing up clock. That's bad for the quarterbacks on both sides. It's bad for the quarterback on the winning team because if all he's doing is turning around and handing it off, he's not getting any fantasy points. It's also bad for the quarterback on the losing team because if the quarterback on the winning team is just handing it off, then they're going to be chewing up clock, which is going to shorten the game. Therefore, when the quarterback on the losing team does get in, even though he's going to be playing from behind and probably throwing the ball, he very likely will not have as many chances to throw the ball as somebody who's in a close game that's going back and forth where every time you get the ball, you need to move it and try to get yourself a score. Couple other things that we look at. We do like guys that are the underdog. If you're the underdog in a close game, you're going to probably be the guy that's playing from behind. If you're playing from behind, that means you're going to be throwing the ball for all 4 quarters all the way till the end, especially in the fourth quarter. How many times do we see teams go back and forth, picking up a couple late touchdowns when the other team is playing prevent? Those points count the same in fantasy, whether you score them in the first period or in the second half. So no matter what you do in fantasy, you still want to make sure that you got guys that have upside and are going to be playing all the way to the end of the game. The last thing we want to talk about is home field advantage. whenever you have an underdog playing at home, there's a good chance that they're going to play as hard as they can and try to get up for the hometown crowd. We've seen quite a few teams that you would have thought would get blown out who wind up sticking around and having a chance at the end. They don't always wind up winning a game, but they do keep fighting, and they fight for all 60 minutes. If you're going to have a quarterback who's going to be doing that, he's going to rack up more yardage and more touchdown passes than somebody who is getting blown out and whose team is giving up. The last thing I want to talk about is a tip for some of the pros out there. For some of you guys who have been playing daily fantasy for a while, looking back on the winning rosters for the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings for the last year, you're going to notice that sometimes you want to get that rushing quarterback in there. A guy like Russell Wilson was a big play in a couple weeks last year. Won a couple people qualifier seats, won a couple people, some seriously big money on some of these tournaments on DraftKings. And most people don't realize the reason for that. But the reason for that is that rushing yards are worth more than passing yards, and rushing touchdowns are worth more than passing touchdowns. So if you can get a quarterback who's able to run for 50 or 60 yards, you get 1 point for every 10 yards rushing, as opposed to 1 point for every 25 yards passing. So if you have a guy who can rush for 40 yards, you need the quarterback to throw for 100 yards to equal the same amount of points that you get for those 40 yards rushing. If you have a guy that can rush for 60 yards, you need a quarterback to throw 150 yards just to equal that same amount of rushing. If you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson who can rush for 50 or 60 yards and also throw for 200 to 250 yards, that's really somebody who's an ideal start. You'll get 6 points for his rushing yards, you'll get another 10 points out of his passing yards, and you'll wind up somewhere around 16. In order to get 16 points from a quarterback who doesn't run the ball like a Peyton Manning, you would need him to throw for about 325 yards. So with a guy like Russell Wilson, you definitely want to keep him in mind. It's also good because a guy like Russell Wilson tends to tuck the ball and run it into the end zone. Passing touchdowns are only worth 4 points on DraftKings, whereas rushing touchdowns are worth 6. So if you can get a guy like Russell Wilson who likes to run the ball, or even some of the guys like a Ben Roethlisberger or a Cam Newton, who are big, strong guys who do a lot of quarterback sneaks when they get down towards the goal line, if they're able to get the ball in the end zone, with their feet by rushing it in there, you're going to wind up with more points than a guy who has a lot of passing touchdowns. Again, if Peyton Manning throws for 3 touchdowns through the air, that's going to get him 12 fantasy points. But if you have a guy like Russell Wilson and Russell Wilson runs in 2 touchdowns, he's going to get you the same 12 fantasy points that Peyton Manning did. If he's able to add a touchdown to that through the air, you're going to wind up with a better score. A guy who runs for 250 yards, a guy who runs for 50 yards with 250 yards passing is going to wind up getting you 15 points. If he has 2 rushing touchdowns and 1 passing touchdown, that's going to be another 16 points and add up to 31 fantasy points for you. If you have a guy who throws for 300 yards, which is the same amount of yards as the other guy had, and winds up throwing for 3 touchdowns, he's only going to wind up with 27 points, or 4 points behind what your rushing guy could get you. There were a lot of times last year where a guy like Russell Wilson was a good guy to start when he was in a good matchup using his legs. If he's going to get you 60 or 70 rushing yards, like we said, that's the equivalent of somebody throwing for 150 to 175. It's much easier and much safer to rely on him to get those yards with his legs than it is to rely on the quarterback that you're taking to throw for 250, 300 yards every game. And again, Russell Wilson does also throw for 150 to 250 yards a game, so you're still getting some points for his passing yardage as well. There was even one time last year where I think he got the double bonus for both passing and rushing, and I know there were at least a couple times where he got the rushing bonus as well. So if you can get 100 yards rushing out of a guy like Russell Wilson, that's 10 points right there, plus 3 points for the bonus for 13, and that would be the equivalent of somebody throwing for about 299 yards or less. He would actually outscore most quarterbacks on a weekly basis just using his legs. So those are some tips for the beginners, the season-long convert, and the pro over on DraftKings Daily Fantasy NFL. It should be a great season with a lot of money in the prize pool, so make sure you get over there, sign up for an account. If you haven't signed up for an account, you can come over and sign up at rotocurve.com. We have a link that sends you over there where you also get some bonuses and some free money. It's one of the best offers that's out there in the business. So if you are looking to sign up and start playing at DraftKings, be sure to sign up at RotoCurve first and click through the links that we have over there. You won't regret doing it when you see the free money that you're able to get into your account. So that wraps up our DK quarterback selection show for today. And as always, stay classy, DFS.